Right at the start of the book, Ms. Nooyi, you make a comment that for me is really the core of the soul of your book. You say the titans of industry, politics, and economics talked about advancing the world through finance, technology, and flying to Mars. Family, the actual messy, delightful, difficult, and treasured core of how most of us live, was fringe. And that is true, right? Your peer group right now is in this most astonishing space race, and you've written a book on family.
It's interesting that, I sit on the Future of Work committee of many organizations, including MIT. And they all talk about robotics, they talk about technology, how it's going to change how people work. But nobody ever talks about the future of work being one that has to be inclusive, make sure that women and men and young family builders can all engage in the paid work. It doesn't talk about the fact that jobs of the future are more oriented towards women, care jobs, teaching jobs, frontline nursing, doctors' jobs. They don't say that we need women to be in the workforce. How do we support them in having families? It never goes through that discussion at all. For some reason, when you bring that up, it's viewed as a soft subject. Oh, that's for women to handle on their own. I think it's time that all of those became part of the core discussion as opposed to robots and flying to different planets. I think we've got to get down to basics. How are we going to make society work? How are we going to take away the stress of creating a family? How are we going to care for each other? How are we going to restore trust in each other? Those discussions have got to become central to our conversations as, caring members of any country.
And I think in many ways, a large part of your book is just about that, as you describe your own life and your experiences and what you call, your own set of dualities. Indian American, wife and mother, working woman, business leader, soda and chips, healthy eating. Some of these contrasts are contrasts I would like to discuss a little bit deeper with you to get a sense of what you were thinking then, how you view them now, and how the rest of us should look at it. Let me start first, in this theme of life of a working woman, with this point of purpose versus ambition. I did think that as you wrote about your life in the book, the purpose was very visible: to work, to progress, to rise up, to make the most of the opportunities given to you. But there was no overt ambition. At no point do you speak about, this is what I wanted to be, this is what I grew up dreaming to be. Was there no such deeply ambitious goal?
Well, it's interesting because I grew up in a family where everybody worked for the government or worked for a state bank or were lawyers. There were hardly anybody in our entire family that worked for a corporation. So I didn't know what a corporate job was all about. So in many ways, we were writing the rules. My sister and I were writing the rules as we went along. When we went to IIM, we got the first peek into the world of business. Then you come out of the IIMs, you get your first peek into what a corporate job could look like. So at every point in time, it was like, oh my God, I've come to a new area. How am I going to succeed? How am I going to thrive in this new job, in this new environment? So we were the pioneers, learning things as we went along. Coming alone to the US, my God, that was not considered okay for the daughters in families like ours. Yet we were allowed to dream, we were allowed to soar. So again, my God, another new avenue for exploration has been opened to us. So when you're like a kid in a candy store looking at each new experience as something new, the last thing you're thinking about is, how do I reach the top of corporate America? That seemed like a dream that was unattainable. So all that we did was work every job and do the job to the best of our ability and hope that everything else took care of itself, whatever the everything else was. We didn't know what the everything else was going to be. We just kept working at every job. And one thing led to another thing. And before you knew it, you were in the C-suite and then you became a CEO.
You were surprised almost, in the book at least you make it out to be, when you were told that you were going to be appointed CEO of Pepsi. You didn't expect it?
Well, the CEO who was in PepsiCo at that time was still young. And a dear friend and somebody who was my mentor. And we'd always talked about, Steve, you and I can retire together. So we had all these plans of doing something else together. And all of a sudden, he decides he's going to retire and spend more time with his family. And the board is going through a whole succession discussion. They didn't involve the succession candidates in the succession discussion because they had seen us in action over the past few years. So when I was told that I was going to be CEO, I was surprised because Steve was leaving at such a young age. That surprised me. A company that had had 4 white male CEOs before me, and all of a sudden somebody like me going to be appointed CEO, surprised me that the board was so different in its thinking that they would take a chance in appointing somebody like me. The third is most of the people who had been CEOs had actually run a business, been a P&L operator all their lives. I was not that. I came from a completely different pathway. So the fact that they would take a chance on me, I was just surprised. I was pleasantly surprised, a bit scared, but yeah, I was surprised.
Was there a moment of doubt at all in your head when you were offered the position? Maybe the urge to say no?
Urge to say no, that wasn't there. Because at that point, if they're telling you that you're going to be CEO, you don't say, oh, no, I don't want it. Because what are they going to do? Go back to the board and say the next candidate is not the right candidate? That's not how it works at those levels. Butterflies in my stomach? Yeah. I mean, I'm going to be in the world stage. I'm going to be given the keys to one of the most iconic companies in the world. I'm going to have to deliver in full public display all the time. And I'm going to have to mobilize this large company to deliver on whatever agenda I craft. When you're number 2, and I was to Steve, you think the distance between being a president and CEO is, not much. We can learn the job. But when you actually become CEO, you're it. Everybody's looking at you for direction, for, long-term strategic focus. And you better get on the job really fast. So I was scared. I must say there were butterflies in my stomach inside. Outside, I was projecting confidence because nobody wants to see their new CEO afraid or tentative. So you have to play the game.
I'll come back to some of the work, but this was also the time in your life when you did get married. You had 2 children, and one of the strongest themes in your book is the battle. You call it the duality, I call it the contrast. Your battle with the guilt of not maybe having enough time for your husband, your daughters, and I want to illustrate some of this by reading bits of your book so that our audiences understand what I'm referring to, because you've written very eloquently about this. I think one of the saddest moments is when you read or you write about a note from your daughter. And I'm going to quote from the book: on a big sheet of construction paper decorated with flowers and butterflies, she begs me to come home. I will love you again if you please come home, the note says. In her sweet crooked printing, the word please is spelled out 7 times. You lived with this guilt for some 3 or 4 decades, didn't you?
Yeah, and the guilt never goes. I have to tell you that guilt never goes. Being a mother is a full-time job. Being a wife, daughter-in-law is also a big job. Being a CEO is 3 jobs rolled into one. Being a C-suite executive is a couple of jobs. Being a CEO is 3 jobs rolled into one. So there's no way to balance all of them. At best, you can somehow cope with juggling all of them. That's what I was trying to do. Now, I also have to tell you one thing, Menaka. I've talked to a lot of women who opted out of the workforce and chose to stay with their kids. Many of them have also got deep regrets that they didn't stay with the job and they didn't rise. They feel they could have really done a lot more and they have huge regrets. I think anything you do, there's some guilt somewhere in the system. It's not that my kids didn't have help at home, family members at home, caregivers at home. They had all the protections and the support structure at home. But there's something good about having mom or dad at home. And clearly they missed that. I missed it too as a mother. But somehow I balanced it and made it happen. I somehow juggled it and made it happen. Along the way, was there heartache, pain, guilt? Yeah, there was a lot of it. But there's going to be guilt if I'd quit. I'd have felt guilty that I quit. There would have been heartache on the other side. So at the end of the day, I did what I knew best at that point in time. And I'm comfortable with my choices.
There's a point where you wonder, why am I wired this way? Where my inner compass always tells me to keep pushing on with my job responsibilities, whatever the circumstances. I sometimes wish I were wired differently. You bore this guilt through your working career, but you also did something else which I found was interesting. You almost made running a family a group responsibility. You write about it as a collective. I'll quote again from your book. And this is where you draw on the resources of your mother, other family members to help in whenever you or your husband were not present. You write, gradually in Tara's first year, this big collective started to work for all of us. We got into a routine where I felt there was a group looking after the girls and no individual was carrying the whole load. And I found that hugely interesting, that whilst you live with the guilt, you also did think that it was a shared responsibility, not just the woman's. Talk me through your thinking on that.
I don't know how else it can be done. That's the point. I think that if you're going to have a job and your husband is also going to be in paid work, which my husband was, he was having a very high-powered job as a partner in a consulting firm, and we both wanted to keep working, there is no way we're going to do it unless we co-opt all the resources around us to help us. But you can't appoint somebody else, your mother, a temporary mother for the day, and I come back in the evening, I'm going to take the kid back. It's got to be everybody says, I want to help Indra succeed, and I want to help Preeta and Tara also feel like they're supported. So you bring the right people in, you make sure the group works well together, you make sure all of them are focused on one thing, the children. So as long as you treat the people well, you make the right people choices, and you make sure everybody understands their one goal is the happiness and the education of the children and the support structure for the children. And as long as everybody knows you're always there if you're needed. If there was an emergency at home, I was the first person who would come running in. If one of my kids had a temperature, I'd go to the office, since the office was only 10 minutes away from home. I'd come home 3 or 4 times a day. I'd make them their favorite, rice and whatever else mixed with it. I'd make them a cup of Horlicks in the middle of the day. They'd be babysitters and relatives, but I would come running in just to make sure the temperature was taken and mommy was always there. And so, when you want a family and you want children like I did, and I wanted to keep my job because I loved my job, I have to somehow make all of this work. It meant taking time away from me, but that was okay. I wanted to make sure that somehow all these pieces work together. There was a time in my life, though, Menaka, I said, enough with this guilt. Let me park it aside. I can't do anything about all the guilt. It's done in the past. That was not until about 5 years ago. Till then, I carried loads of guilt. I was lucky with a wonderful husband. In spite of that, I carried loads of guilt. It's in my DNA.
No, and that's very evident in the book. Ms. Nooyi, I'm going to ask you a question that seems obnoxious, maybe too intrusive as well, but I'll ask you nonetheless, because this is what critics ask of women. Why didn't you choose to have just one child instead of 2? Why didn't you maybe cut back on some of your work? You didn't seem to be very ambitious. So why not make those compromises? I felt if there was just one kid, she'd be lonely because, we're in the United States, the 2 of us and just one child. And now my sister had one child, wonderful, wonderful daughter. But I always knew that she would have loved to have had a sister or a brother because, it's just companionship and friendship. And so I felt that Preeta deserved a brother or sister. I went through a series of accidents and things like that, so I couldn't have a child immediately. But when I could have a child, I had a second child. Probably the best decision I made. My 2 daughters are my life, our life. My husband and I view them as our life. Could I have cut back on my work life? Yeah, I could have. But here's the problem. I told you I'm wired differently. It didn't matter whether I advanced in my corporate life or not. Whatever job I was doing, I was going to do it to the very best test of my ability. And I was going to push the boundaries of whatever needed to be done. I'm just that way, Menaka. I can't
I can't change. And it doesn't matter if I'm in a corporate job or I'm at home reorganizing cupboards, or if I'm trying to cook something. I'm always trying to see, how can I improve it? How can I just make it a little better? What else can I read to make sure that I can just do a little better job with it? I don't know why I'm wired that way. I need to almost rethink my brain and how I think for me to completely slow down. That's a positive and a negative.
When you look back, do you think about the emotional toll this guilt took on you?
No, I don't think it took an emotional toll. It caused a lot of guilt, but then I was also practical, saying, hey, we were first generation immigrants. Every first generation immigrant worked their tail off. Okay, many were not even given a chance to thrive and move ahead. At least I was given a chance to thrive and move ahead. And so I look at it as I was given chances. I created opportunities for myself. I had mentors who stepped up. And I'm just going to keep working. And, people, my family said, even my in-laws, who, typically they'd say a woman's in-laws don't support her. In my case, I had the opposite. Everybody in my in-laws' family, my husband's family, to a person, said to me, please don't give up your job, we'll help you. My father-in-law, mother-in-law, aunts, uncles-in-law, all of them. They were all proud of what I was doing. They would talk about it publicly, and that kind of tailwinds they generated, which was highly unusual. They generated that kind of tailwinds.
Just to stay with this theme, just for one more question, you've interacted with dozens of corporations across the world, both in your capacity as CEO of PepsiCo, and even now you are on the board of Amazon, Philips. You're also on the board of ICC still, I think. So,
yeah.
What are corporations not doing enough?
I think 3 things need to happen, and as I wrote in the book, and one thing is already happening. Paid leave, giving maternity, paternity leave is very important. And I think in India, they do have generous policies. In a country like the US, it's still, it's happening as we speak. Flexible hours, flexible locations from which to work, or, when to work. The pandemic, advanced technology, and now flexibility is becoming the norm. But the third most important thing is childcare. I think that having on-site or near-site childcare is very important. And if you balance that with flexible work hours, you don't need childcare for all days of the week. Some days of the week you can use childcare. The other days you take flexible hours and work from home. So the pandemic actually helped in this one particular area. Many companies are now stepping up to on-site or near-site childcare. I can tell you here in the US, PepsiCo is doing it, JP Morgan Chase, companies like Electric Boat in Connecticut, Stanley Black & Decker, they're all looking at childcare as a competitive advantage now, because to recruit the best and the brightest to come and work in your company, you need women to come to work in your company. Women are getting the top grades, they're the valedictorians. So if you want women to come and you want them to be family builders too, you have to provide the support structures for them. And I think in the India case, Menaka, I've been reading about the Anganwadis. And I think that it would be fantastic to take a particular community, take the Anganwadis, and say, how do we make Anganwadi 3.0 or 4.0? Where you really upgrade that Anganwadi to be a great childcare facility for the people who work in fields, as nurses, as caregivers, because they're the people who struggle the most. How do you provide great childcare, maternal care, perhaps not senior care, but use senior citizens to help with all of these jobs for the community? We have to bring back trusts in communities. We have to rethink the Anganwadi structure to provide those roles so we can allow young women to be family builders and be in paid jobs. It's time to have a conversation about this.